Here, I'd like to call this meeting to order for the Floresville City Council, our regular scheduled meeting today, June the 28th at 6 p.m. And if you would please rise for our invocation, I will call on Mr. Fred Gonzalez, followed by our Pledge of Allegiance and Texas Pledge.
Let us pray. Heavenly Father, as always, we ask that you be with us tonight as we do the city's business. We thank you first and foremost for your many blessings that we receive each and every day. And we ask that you infuse us with a desire to do the work that we have at hand and to do it as well as we can and to work together getting there. And give us the wisdom to understand what is best for this town of ours and help us to get there. We pray this in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Under the Texas flag, I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
In attendance tonight, we do have a quorum. All in attendance, Councilman David Johns, Councilwoman Gloria Cantu, myself, Mayor Sissy Gonzalez-Dipple, Councilman Juan Ortiz, Councilman Nick Nissen, and Councilman Gerard Jimenez. Thank you so much. And at this time, if we have any comments? Okay.
And the mayor's looking quite funny because she's saying she's not a citizen, but I do live in the city of Floresville. I just need to do a commercial for our Freedom Fest, Mayor, if you would allow us to do so during this portion of the meeting. Our Freedom Fest is going to be happening Friday, and we're going to feature Little Joe, and later on your agenda, you're going to be hopefully passing out a proclamation, and then we're having Saturday. In your envelopes, there's a schedule of when I need you all to be there. And so we want to definitely say Freedom Fest 18, and we want to thank EDC for the fireworks, 4A for all their hard work, and we've been setting up some things. So I just wanted to say that at the beginning of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other citizens' comments at this time? This is the opportunity for anyone to get up and speak to the council. Okay. If not, we'll move on to old business. Consideration and action to approve the minute meetings for the regular council meeting on June the 14th, 2018. It was a very long meeting, so I hope that the council has had a chance to go through the minutes, and I will give you just a moment or two to make any changes or corrections. Okay. If no corrections, I will entertain a motion to accept the minutes.
I move to approve.
I have a motion on the floor by Councilwoman Cantu. Do I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilman Ortiz. All those in favor, please raise your right hand. Thank you. Moving on to our first presentation, item 2A is our 2017 audit. We have our representatives from ADIP and Council. He did give you copies of the audit in front of you.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. Thank you for having me. My name is Mike Del Toro, and I'm a partner with ADIP. We met with the audit committee on June 7th and presented a detailed version. We presented a draft in which we went into great detail into the financials. I'm going to cover most, if not everything, that we covered at that meeting, although for the sake of time, I'll try and push through and cover, obviously, the most important pieces that came out of that discussion. If we look at the bound document and can open up to page 1, it's the page that has our letterhead, ABIP CPA advisors at the top. It's the independent auditor's report. It is a clean opinion. It indicates that we conducted our audit in accordance with auditing standards generally accepted in the United States and government auditing standards, and that we find that the financial statements as presented are presented in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. That, in essence, is a clean opinion. The term is unmodified opinion. That would indicate that the audit went well. I will say this, that only means that the information in here is presented, that there's reliable, assured upon information within this document, that we've done our due diligence and that we find the numbers presented here are reliable to make decisions. There is, however, some poor financial health that we're going to go through, and we'll look at that in detail. If we could turn to page 18, this is the balance sheet for the governmental funds. And the primary fund of the city is obviously the general fund. It's our main operating account. And that column, I just want to point everyone's attention down to the fund balance, which is it's the first column all the way down to the lower page. And we see an unassigned fund balance of a negative $104,000. That's not a good financial picture, obviously, for the general fund. General fund has been bouncing. I think back in 2013, we had brought to the attention to council and management that we had some, that things did not look good in the general fund. And we have implemented a financial plan. For some reason, that came off, the wheels came off during this fiscal year. And we'll see in a little bit when we look at the budget to actuals that we overspent on our budget almost to the tune of $400,000 from what we approved as a budget to what actually we spent during the fiscal year. And that's the result of us now dipping into a negative fund balance. The city has, at least during this fiscal year, about $4.6 million in expenditures. Best practices for local governments should be to keep anywhere between 3 and 6 months of operating reserves of our operating expenses. That would indicate that a city with $4.6 million in expenses should have a reserve of about 1.2 on the low end to 2.3 on a very comfortable end, so 3 to 6 months. We're far from that, and we have not been, for some years we're kind of building up slowly, but in the last year or so we've really dipped into it, and now we're in a negative position. The general fund also at the end of the fiscal year, obviously a lot of negative news for the general fund, but we also borrowed at the end of the fiscal year. We owed our other funds, primarily the water and sewer fund, which is really the only other funds that are not restricted in some nature. We owed them about $264,000. So general fund is in a poor health, and we presented that to management, and in a little bit, Henrietta will present a budget and fiscal policy to get back on track going forward. But that did not paint a good picture for 2017. The other items on there, we have the debt service fund, which is obviously there to pay the city's debt. And then the capital projects fund. The capital projects fund is where we are spending bond money that we've issued for general fund activities. And that's primarily the city hall renovations and the park additions that the city's going through. If we turn to page 20, this is our first look at the annual activities of the general fund. First column there, general fund. We had $3.6 million in revenue. We'll see in a little bit that was actually above budget, that we actually brought in a little bit more than we had anticipated. But we also had expenses of $4.6 million, as I mentioned. So our overall activities from revenue less expenses, we have a negative $1 million. A little bit below that, you see we brought in $700,000 from other funds, primarily the water and sewer fund. And we have been sort of raiding the coffers over the last couple of years out of the water and the sewer funds to pump up the general fund. So without those transfers in, we would have had a loss, overall loss of $1 million. But we brought $700,000 in, and so our overall loss in the general fund was $326,000. I say we've been raiding the coffers. We're almost tapped out in the water and sewer fund, that we can no longer sustain bringing over those transfers to cover our operating activities. And that was the critical area, the critical message I wanted to communicate, obviously to you, but to the audit committee and to management, that we had to do something. We got to implement a plan now, because the way we've been operating this is unsustainable. We can no longer be relying on these transfers out of other funds. Looking at the capital projects fund, we see we brought in, we spent $2.3 million. That column, that was our city hall expenses that we did there. That was all. The park. I'm sorry, the park, yes. Okay, if we turn to page 22, these are our preparatory funds, the water and sewer being the primary preparatory funds. If we look at the bottom, we have fund balance unrestricted in the water fund of $240,000 unrestricted. Obviously, a lot of what we have in the water fund, we have some capital equipment and systems that we have. So that eats up a lot of what our fund balance is within the water fund. So you can see we've rated this water fund now that we're down to about $240,000 in fund balance. That would have been a lot higher had we not done those transfers over the last couple of years out of the water fund to sustain the general fund's activities. And then the sewer fund, we're sitting at $339,000. Again, that number would be higher had we not transferred out. Within the sewer fund, the important activity that happened in there was we closed on or issued the USDA notes. So you see in the sewer fund, we have about $3.2 million up in the top area in restricted cash. That's restricted for the USDA project. Turning to page 55, here's where we start to look at the budget to actual in the general fund. And at the very top, we see revenues, and we had originally we budgeted $3.2 million, and then we amended that during the year and amended it up to 3.3. And we actually brought in $3.6 million, which was $241,000 more than we anticipated. Below that, the expenditure areas, we budgeted $4.1 million. We amended that to 4.176, and then our actual expenditures were $4.6 million. So we exceeded our expenditure budget by $484,000. Now the problem there too is that we should not be exceeding our budget. That's actually a statutory violation. Management should not be spending more than council has approved them to spend. So that we have a compliance finding on that we'll look at in a little bit. But and you'll see too that we have a comment because we didn't have something in place that stopped us from spending until we had a budget amendment to authorize management to spend more than what was appropriated for. So in the end, our budget after the transfers in, we had a negative budget of $352,000 that we overspent overall in our budget, $352,000. So, any questions so far? Please. Yes, sir.
And I don't know how much money we're looking at or whatever.
Councilman.
I said, I don't know exactly how much money we're looking at or anything, but we've asked our attorney to look into it, but The guy that we had here prior was a superintendent, and he's left us. But I don't know where he came up with the number 49,000 that of damages that Spectrum has done here to our city. I believe we've been transferring a lot of funds because of them, and it's it's a big number because we've been babysitting them constantly after them. Water breaks with parts, labor, overtime, our machines, everything total. So I don't know exactly what the number is, but I don't know where he came out with $49,000. But I don't know, would that be something that, a big expenditure that we weren't supposed to spend?
Some of them, I believe most of it's in payroll-related transactions. Yes, sir.
First of all, I think Spectrum is in the year 17, 18, and we're working on 16, 17. So Spectrum wasn't here at that
But
point.
they weren't here that,
No, not at that point.
No, Spectre started in 17, 18.
okay.
Which is this audited year that we're doing right now. You're not doing 16.
Right, this is for fiscal year 16,
Oh,
17.
okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But I didn't remember exactly what time.
Yeah.
If,
Okay.
if you look at page 55, if you look at the expenditures.
Before we go on, I think Councilman Johns had.
Oh, yes, sir.
On some of these, anytime there's a big transfer of money like that, where it's changing the budget, shouldn't that come before the council to get approval? Because none of this came before the council.
The transfers themselves, if we're talking about the transfers from
Yeah,
moving money from one fund to the other, those actually were budgeted for. We did budget for transfers. But the over expenditures across line items, that's the part that it should have come to council
Yeah.
before we spent. Case in point, if we look at administration, for instance, and obviously there's a lot of line items under administration. There's payroll, there's maintenance, there are various line items. And it was pervasive. I mean, there wasn't like one thing where I could say, this is what we overspent on. And you look department by department, it was just a pervasive breakdown in monitoring and tracking what was approved for, what are we spending, we need to go get a budget amendment if we're gonna have to pay this invoice.
So it never got, but it should have been before the council saying, hey, we got a whole bunch of these things that happened. So
Yes.
they just came and rated it with no council approval.
Correct.
Said, okay, we're just moving it over here.
And part of the problem was they had a manual system for tracking this, and the manual system obviously had some problems.
That would be full city managers.
Yeah.
Should have been
Yes.
keeping the council informed of what was going on. Is that not your proper procedure or just overriding?
Sure, it was a breakdown of procedure, and we have a management comment on that, on the fact that there was no tracking of that. I will say this, going forward, they have implemented and this is in this upcoming fiscal year you're in, they've implemented where they turn the system on. So the system is tracking and will not allow for payments on invoices or approvals of POs if it's going to exceed
This
budget.
happened the year before also.
Yeah.
The same, so this
Yeah.
just continued the same activities that, okay.
Councilwoman Kent, you had a question as well?
Yeah, I was gonna say, like the 37,500 that we spent for the consultant, that wasn't on the budget.
Right.
So we had to find that money, which we never did. And there was a lot of other things that.
You didn't find the money, but a check was sent.
Exactly, and there was
Yeah.
probably more, because I don't know if we paid for room and board or not.
Yeah.
Okay,
May I?
yes.
Okay, I
If you
want
can
to
move your microphone down.
point out that also on page 55, if you look at the revenues on the franchise fees, we had budget 771,891 for us to receive on revenues, and we were shortfall. We only received 539,000. So that revenue didn't come in, and that's on the tune of 232,000. So not only did the expenditures went up, but the revenues went down. So that's the reason why we ended up with a negative at the end of the fiscal year.
Yes and no. I mean, you still brought in 241,000 more in revenue. If he hadn't brought in that 247,000 more in revenue, we'd be looking at a much larger budget deficit here, so.
And also,
Yes.
and also the tractor that, Mr. Nixon, you and Mr., the Public Works Director paid $24,999 in Houston, the one that's sitting there, that was not budgeted either, so. it's a lot of little
That's
things.
not true. That was budgeted in the budget.
We didn't know anything about it.
Yes, you did. It was in the budget of the
We
equipment
didn't
for us to
even, because it
buy.
was under 25,000.
Okay, you can go ahead.
Yeah, again, I mean, I just want to point that the problem was pervasive. I mean, there doesn't seem to be like, I mean, one transaction or a handful of transactions. This is just a breakdown in tracking. What did council approve us to spend, and why are we going over this? And let's not go over it until we get council approval. So, further questions?
Madam Mayor, may I ask you a question? Would January 1st have any effect on this budget of this year?
January 1st?
Yes.
Of this past January? No, sir.
No.
But January of 2000?
Half months. 6 months ago.
No, sir. Your fiscal year ended 9/30/2017. That's what we're reporting on here.
And another question, if some funds were amended and being put in this fund, we're still in a debt, right? As we speak tonight.
You probably are. We have not looked at the financial information subsequent to this period, but I'm certain that,
And
just based on,
and as months go by, to July, August, and
Yeah.
September, we're still going to be more in a deficit, right?
yes, if you continue to spend more than you're bringing in, maybe Clyde
Right.
knows more about where we are today. We're still in a deficit.
Right.
Further in the hole, or
Yes, and what I'm gonna present later on before the end of the year is that I'm gonna go through the current budget and do some cuts and come and have them approved by you, so that way we can minimize the amount that we're gonna be on the minus at the end of the year.
yeah. And after this presentation, Henrietta's going to present the fiscal policy going forward and how we're going to improve and hopefully build up to this 1.2 so reserve in some future period.
That's our goal.
That's the goal, yeah.
This year, I guess maybe like other years, but this year more so, we had a lot of unbudgeted items, that would have affected this. So I'd just like to mention that.
Now, you mentioned the fact that the new computer system or the program that you use will not allow you to go over budget. When did that go into effect?
That went into effect, Mayor, this year. After the audit that we had last year, we spent some time, you all approved in this budget that we're in right now, to do something with Encode, because your auditor can tell you that some of the cash wasn't balancing out. It wasn't giving us the reports that it needed to do. And so what we did was we went and sent all staff to training. We had a consultant that came up, and I know you work with our consultant to get those reports out, so that we had the modules, but in the last 8 years, they've never turned them on. And so we're using all the modules that will not allow it to go over and reference to do things such as that. So this year, in this audit, hopefully we won't have that comment as well. We had eliminated some of the comments that were from last year and that were due so. What we did last year was a very long audit. It was ongoing. Even when we were at this point last year, we were still completing the audited numbers. And so we were fine. We were playing catch up. And Connie was playing catch up, and we have our bookkeeper now that we added this year, so that we're hoping that we can get ahead of this on the curve and to be able to make these adjustments going forward that have been historically spiraling a little bit, added on. But I don't want to take anything away from the auditor.
Can I ask a question, Madam Mayor?
Yes.
I think this might go to Connie. There was a news film there about police getting audited. How much did that audit cost for
If you're talking about the one that I know
Mr.
about-
Jacob, I think so, at that time he was being interviewed, and did that audit happen?
Yes, it did happen,
And how much did that audit cost?
about 37,000.
37,000, that was not budgeted.
No, it wasn't.
There is where our damage is being done. Audits that don't have to be done. We can work with them, the community and the council. There's many consultants that we are getting, and it's costing the taxpayer too much funds, and I believe there's where the $100,000 do play a big role. Yes, there's some other issues on hand, but I mean, we have to take under consideration, council, that we must stop this spending, this unauthorized spending, overspending. That's all I have to say, but we just have to be careful.
Okay, we can go forward.
One of the comment I'll make is that going for a fiscal year in the deficit, 326,000, is not uncommon for a city of your size. There are always unbudgeted items that will come up. Now, granted, the fact that we didn't amend the budget is a problem, and it's a separate problem though. The fact that we went below, that we dipped into our fund balance by 326,000. The pervasive thing is we've never built up our reserves. We should have reserves in there to absorb for these unbudgeted necessary items. And I'm not here to evaluate whether the over budgets were necessary or not. But assuming they were necessary, and the benefit of the doubt is that they were necessary items that we needed to spend. What happened this year is a systematic problem that we haven't built up reserves, that we've been operating at a near zero fund balance for too long as an organization, as a city. And we gotta move forward with a plan where we're going to build up a reserve necessary for the size of our city so that we can absorb the necessary unbudgeted items that you don't anticipate at the beginning when you plan the budget, but you need to spend. So that's what your reserves are there for. I mentioned at the audit committee that I recently attended a conference where there were a lot of representatives from local governments from the Gulf Coast regions. And they were affected by Hurricane Harvey. And they had to shut down. And they had to make hard decisions on, do we keep paying our personnel? Do we, everyone's displaced. What do we do? How do we support the functions of the city when the city's really not functioning? And they all had to rely on their operating reserves. This city has not had operating reserves since I've been associated with it. And clearly not now because we're sitting in the negative. The city has got to put forth a plan, and a real plan, to, in the near future, get an adequate operating reserve to support the unnecessary, or unbudgeted and necessary expenditures that happen during fiscal years. And so that's my last comment on the budget.
How many years has your company been doing the audit for Floresville?
If we go back to Pat Wagner, and I don't know if any of you are familiar with Pat Wagner, we're probably looking at 10 years now.
How many years you been saying to build up the reserve?
About 10 years now. About 10 years, yeah. Okay. And I think in 2013, we hit the low point. Obviously, before this point, we hit a real low point. And we did pretty well for a couple of years, but then in the last 2 or so, we went back into, spending, and it's not just spending too, are we bringing in enough revenue for the services that we're offering too? And I know no one wants to hear about taxes, but if we're spending $4.2 million and those are necessary expenditures, well then we got to bring in the revenues that are going to support that. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, I've got a question. This year and part of last year, we've done a whole lot of work in our city, you know, that maybe, that might have hurt our budget a little bit. You know, we did a lot of drainages, a lot of street work, a lot of everything. You know, water lines, sewer lines, a lot of stuff that weren't anticipated. And I think we spent a lot of the money well spent. So, you know, I don't think $104,000 for a city of